Our annual conference sheds light on the ways in which heritage is entangled with notions of culture and how such entanglements are politically utilized.
Who creates, sustains, or destroys items of heritage? What factors in the processes of such making, sustaining, and breaking influence the perception that an item then becomes, remains, or ceases to be heritage?
These questions are the starting point for our joint conference, Making, Sustaining, Breaking, the Politics of Heritage and Culture.
Heritage and its relevance for culture and for political processes presents a vast field for academic inquiry, one that can hardly be dealt with coherently by one discipline or institution.
We are thus very pleased that a cooperation of our institutions is possible.
While we all share the mission to promote interdisciplinary and transcultural communication, we each bring in our specific expertise and disciplinary approach, regional and cultural focus.
Another aspect that is important to us is, while scholarship views cultural heritage as something constantly being constructed and is subject to assimilation, change, or denial, it is at the same time postulated by groups as an aspect of their identification or exclusion from other groups.
Nation-states, most prominently, justify the political agenda by persistently reinforcing or even reinventing cultural heritage as national identity.
These opposing perceptions are the baseline for the conference Making, Sustaining, Breaking. In 2 keynote lectures, 13 panels and a concluding roundtable discussion, we present ongoing research and case studies across periods of time.
Not only by looking at instances in history, but most importantly by connecting current cases to the historical entanglements, can we reach a deeper understanding and answer the questions we raise.
And it's up to the humanities to provide them.
What was crucially sacrificed was the integrity of some of the objects themselves. On the suggestions of Mortimer Wheeler, who himself was an archaeologist, who had served as Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, and who was at this point in time the archaeological advisor to the government of Pakistan, some unique articles were actually divided down the middle. And oddly enough, nowhere in the correspondence is there a sense that the character of these objects were being permanently destroyed, as the overriding principle on which museum collections and antiquities are to be divided. Here, archaeologists and negotiators, in their anxiety to adhere to what was politic, failed to actually explore what might have been much more ethical options. So this is what Panikkar writes to Nehru. He says, with the separation of the Pakistan provinces, the main sites of what was known as the Indus Valley civilization have gone to Pakistan. It is clearly of utmost importance that archaeological work in connection with this early period of Indian history must be continued in India. They started to ravage the mound by running the bulldozer in order to rob valuable sculptures and antiquities. As told by the villagers, the whole operation took about 5 to 6 hours, and then the miscreants left the village. There's little doubt that in a situation where a choice has to be made between safeguarding a monument, even one as iconic as the Taj Mahal, and the protection of the agendas of political people, heritage is likely to be the loser.
And upon knowing that I am originally from Iraq and discussing ISIS and the destruction of cultural heritage, he said, quote, "It's terrible what's happening there. The people you know are replaceable, but all the relics that were destroyed are not." End of quote. When I received the invitation to speak at this conference and learned of the overarching theme, I was reminded of that conversation and how and why the sense of loss extends and applies to certain objects, particularly ones considered part of the global or shared heritage, but not always or equally to the humans living near or around them and to whom they belong. And I will try to address the question of what is at stake politically in such responses. What ideological snares are always lurking, and why is the way a poet implots destruction and loss particularly of heritage, consequential for the future. In April of last year, for example, after the video of the destruction of Namrud circulated, Hugh Aiken, senior editor of the New York Review of Books, called for, quote, military intervention to protect archaeological sites. He called for extending the doctrine of responsibility to protect, which is used to justify military intervention to stop genocide, to the protection of cultural heritage. There are other examples from the refugee camps inside Iraq and elsewhere, of course, of these initiatives. And then miniatures of these. I mean, we could talk also about all the other sites that are considered part of Syrian and Iraqi heritage that never catch the attention in the global north because they are not part of this 19th century discourse of civilizations that are frozen and that served as the static other to our dynamic forward-marching civilization. It is, of course, not only ruins that have been destroyed, but entire cities, including millions of homes. Those too are part of the heritage of the Syrian people. Perhaps I'm making a very traditional point here that it has been made before, but calling for the extension of the meaning of heritage. Homes and cities cannot be digitally reproduced in their entirety, nor printed in 3D.
So when we talk about heritage, we talk about human-object relations in which objects are vested with value and worth of preservation, and this means that these objects then place demands on us, on humans, in order to maintain them. Heritage as a frame travels very well, also exists next to other frames of valuing and devaluing objects, and these may be cultural frames or religious frames. We could do much more here to discuss how the frame of heritage relates to other kinds of frames, and the clashes about systems of value and valuation ensued. And I think it is only through a transcultural perspective that we can even look at this. So why are images broken in clashing frames of valuation and devaluation?
I would do justice by raising some key words which I thought were traveling across various panels, across time, and also across spatial entities. And these keywords were starting with colonial endeavors, nation state, modernity, archive, collective memory, and regulation.
When I came back last night and I arrived in Heidelberg and I started looking at your program, and the same happened to me this morning when I started listening to the presentations, I felt that I changed universes. Discourses on heritage vary very much depending on where you are and who to talk to. And there are three levels that I would like to identify that seem to be important and that also should probably be harmonized. There is, of course, the academic discourse. I think what's very important about this discourse, and that's why I'm not joking when I'm saying it opened my heart, it's because it's tearing down barriers and walls, mental barriers, ethical and ethnical barriers, political, and not least legal barriers, which are also very important in the context of cultural heritage. Interesting and a difficult question is, how do we do that? When we say, let's decolonize museums and archaeology, the question for me then is, once I step out of the role of being a professor or an academic, how do I do that? Because the second level that I would like to identify is the institutional level. We have to recognize and we have to remember that there is also a practical side to things when it comes to cultural heritage. There are institutions who have to deal with cultural heritage. There are institutions who have to preserve cultural heritage and have to justify that they own cultural heritage. And then the third level is the one that I had to experience yesterday, which is the level of NGOs and IGOs, intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations. And the IGOs are very, very much based on the concept of a nation state. So I think it's very important to understand that on an international level, there is no question about transculturality, there is no question about post-colonial notions.
But in these entanglements, I want to stress here also very often have to do with tensions, with conflicts, with negotiation and reconciliation, parental relations, and we all know that heritage, even in not only in the field of cultures but also in the field of families, is very often related to very strong conflicts, but also a lot of desires. What kind of heritage do we want to accept? What kind of heritage do we want to reject? And also, I think family is interesting here because it brings in the whole notion of emotion, and the field we are speaking about is highly emotional. And the question I see here is also how scholarship addresses these emotions and can come to terms with it.
The modern nation state, since the late 18th century, basically has assumed, or people have given to it, the moral general responsibility. And if the state does not play the super brother, who is more rational than all its citizens together, we're getting into a big problem. Where is the sustainability? Many of the countries we are talking about are poor, or they consider themselves poor. How are they going to finance sustainability of heritage, especially material heritage? Presupposes, economic viability.
Please, thank you for having played the role of an advocate of America for a few seconds at least.
Thank you very much.
When we look back to Iraq, for example, to other countries, when we look to South America, you see that the destruction of cultural heritage very much is linked to social issues. They have nothing to do with religious extremism, but they very much have to do with social and economic and political instability. And this has been going on for hundreds of years, and in Latin America it's still very, very problematic as we speak right now. If you want to have sustainable heritage, you have to do something against social inequality and social injustice, because otherwise you will not have the kind of protection for heritage that we're hoping for.
My major impression is that it was extremely interesting to have all these different academic fields and institutions present at the conference. This was really amazing to see all the different views on the same topic. So it was good to have 4 institutions here, and within these institutions, very, very different ideas. I was very touched by the poems, and I wish that these poems will be translated into German one day, because they give such a strong impression of feelings that could also help to change some ideas of people coming to Germany within this crisis. I started some years ago of integrating local people into my research project in Tunisia, and this conference just reinforced me in doing so, and doing even more in this aspect.
For me, it has become very clear how important it is that these various disciplines come much more into discussion with each other and exchange. There's very different approaches and different ideas of what different people think about heritage and how they should deal with heritage. I was very much impressed by yesterday evening's keynote speaker, Sinan Antoun, which I've met many years earlier in Beirut already when he was working on Iraq and in the museum and National Archive issue. So I could very much connect to what he was talking about, and so it was very, very impressive to me to hear him again. Because at the German Archaeological Institute we are working in this Stunde Null project, which is very much about capacity building, and for us this conference was also a good opportunity to discuss with other colleagues about priorities, different perceptions of what needs to be done and how it could be done. And one major issue that always comes up again anyway in our work, and that was also supported by our discussions here, is the importance of this engagement with local communities, also with the existing and narratives, historical views and needs of the societies that we're working in. We are obviously, because we're working in these countries, continuously exposed to that, but there much more needs to be done to bring these perspectives together. So here too, actually on that level, we need more platforms for encounter and for dialogue.
I was struck that each of our partners had a network that shared common features of debates and so on. And I was surprised how well it worked out to bring these different perspectives together. It is interesting to be confronted as someone who works mainly with scholars, with people who work at institutions that are also scholarly institutions, but that are engaged with more pragmatic ways. For me, occasions like this are very important to clarify my own way of positioning myself in this field.
So coming here and seeing the great number of people, the different disciplines they came from, the interests they have, the passion that they speak with, that was interesting for me. It's interesting for me to see how people think about contested heritage, and I will certainly take that home to my colleagues and to the people whom I work with.
I think what also was very important for me is understanding the many conflicts that are at stage in processes of in cultural heritage questions, the politics of cultural heritage. It seems such a conflicted field, both in the making of heritage, in the destruction of heritage, and in the processes of restoration campaigns and all this. So conflict seems to be so crucial, and I think going more deeply into that is also something that I learned here from the conference.
Well, the major insight is that different scholars, with different backgrounds, have a hugely different approach.
One of the most striking insights is what a multifaceted concept heritage is. It means different things to so many different people who work with it. We had people from so many disciplines: archaeologists, art historians, political scientists, anthropologists, people from the museums and cultural institutions. So it's really depends on who's talking about it, from what position. You have different insight, and it's this versatility which is also very challenging. And that's the kind of thing that you have to think about, and which can just open up a whole field of questions for you. What I really found very striking and inspiring were the two keynote addresses, because they took two different approaches. Each of the keynotes supplemented the other in a very nice way. You know, the first one told you about the nation state and how it seeks to manage heritage, what it does, what it doesn't do, and then, you know, what are the fault lines within the nation state. You know, you have to think of heritage as something which cuts across borders in ways that it cannot be contained within these national containers. This constant crossing of borders and crossing of scales, negotiating of scales, which is it was a theoretical insight one had, but I think I've become very aware of what a challenge that is to our research.